I find this music very ominous, don't you?
Yeah.
We're going to have big discussions here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the conference and for joining us last night. Senator, thank you. We're thrilled that you're here. We appreciate you taking the time.
I'm glad to be here. I hear there are a lot of college presidents. I know I was once asked, what's more difficult, being governor, cabinet member, United States senator, or college president? And I said to the questioner, obviously, you've never been a college president. You wouldn't ask a dumb question like that.
I can appreciate that. I'm sure the entire audience can appreciate that. I wanted to start, we've got a big, very wide-ranging discussion today, many different issues, but this one's, free speech and affordability of college. But one thing I thought sort of captured the broad discussion is a survey last year from Pew. It said that, it was last June, and it said that for the first time, a majority, or 58% of Republicans, say colleges have a negative effect, compared to 36% saying they have a positive effect on American life. That contrasts with Democrats, 72% of whom viewed colleges positively, up from 65%, compared to negative of 19%. So what is that 58% about? What's this political divide about, do you think?
It's about the perception or the fact that colleges do a poor job of providing access to underrepresented conservative points of view. Let me give you a story. Susan Collins is our most moderate senator, probably. She was invited to a Northeastern college to speak outside her state. A group of students said, we'll disrupt her speech if we're not allowed to meet with her privately. The administration caved in to the students. She had to have the meeting. She was a little offended by that, since she was doing them a favor to begin with. And the meeting went all right, and she made her speech, but the administration should have said, you don't have a heckler's veto. You can not go, you can turn your back, you can counter the speech, you can ask her tough questions, but if you disrupt her speech so she can't speak or the audience can't hear, you'll be punished. And it's the perception among many conservatives who are in the majority in Congress right now that underrepresented points of view aren't heard. And I've talked that over with a number of college presidents. I don't think it's too hard to fix.
How would you do that?
Well, I would apply the same sort of enthusiasm to underrepresented points of view that colleges have applied to underrepresented students. I mean, Vanderbilt, where I went, has a posse for several years. They get a bunch of kids who are coming from difficult backgrounds, and they come together to Vanderbilt, and they reinforce.
Is this the posse program?
Yes, a posse program, and they support each other, and they've done remarkably well. When I went to NYU law school years ago, all the students were from the Bronx and Queens, and they wanted some hillbillies and Swedes and people like that, and they had a program where they picked students from other districts. So they worked hard to diversify the student body. Colleges haven't shown the same skill in making sure that their campuses have the same sort of diversity in points of view.
Right. So what would you do to require that? I mean,
to require it?
Yeah. I mean, can the federal government do anything?
No, I wouldn't. I don't want the federal government defining that. I mean, that'd be the worst thing that could happen. I think the marketplace. Well, first, most college presidents, and there are a lot here, wouldn't want to make their biggest donor deliberately make that donor unhappy. And the federal government approves $100 billion in loans and $30 billion in Pell Grants every year. That's a lot of money, plus about $28 billion that goes through NIH for research. If you feel like, if you know that's the problem, and I think it clearly is, I would, number one, do what Princeton, Chicago are doing. The Princeton president said, our cure is we try to have so many different kinds of speakers that if a controversial one shows up, it's routine. And then I think the second thing to do is if I were still a president, I would go to my own senator and my own congressman and say, I hear you think we don't have different points of view on our campus. Let me tell you what's really going on here because I want you to know firsthand. I think it's the single biggest threat to support for higher education in the country today.
Interesting. Is part of this number, though, concern about the value of higher education, which I know is something else you've been looking at? And
well, there's, yeah, I guess so. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who are even more convinced that more higher education is important. I mean,
right.
You have, like in Tennessee, for example, became the first state to say 2 years of post-secondary institution is tuition free for everybody,
right.
for everybody. So we have a drive for 55. The governor says he wants 55% to have a college degree. So there are questions, but I think more and more in the country, people recognize that post-secondary education is even more important than it ever was. I think, and college presidents may not believe this, but I think 80% of the drop in support for higher education on the Republican side, which happens to be the side that's in charge of the government today, is a real frustration
right.
at the underrepresentation of a point of view.
Right. In terms of what the federal government can do, certainly it looks like the Higher Education Act will not be reauthorized this year. Is that what we're?
That's correct. The Democrats won't do it.
Interesting.
I mean, no, I'm not being partisan. I mean, if you.
Of course not.
No, I think anybody in the Senate would tell you that I spend all my time working to get bipartisan results, and I usually succeed. But in this case, for example, we've given to the Democrats 4 months ago, after 4 years of hearings, our complete proposal about what to do and haven't gotten a response. They want to wait till next year to see if they're in better shape politically. But I keep telling them, look, I can take notes and do to you what you did to me, even if I'm in the minority.
One of the issues is how we're going to talk about accountability. And I think you've talked that you want less emphasis on the default rate. Is that right?
Yeah, the default rate's not turned out to be good. It was done when I was education secretary. Senator Nunn and others were working on it. And basically, what it boils down to is this. It says if a certain number of students default, the college might lose its ability to take students with federal support, and that'd be the death sentence for many colleges. Well, almost no colleges lost anything. And it's based on the 21% of students who haven't made a payment in 9 months on their student loan. My suggestion is that we use student repayment, all of it, as a better indication. About half the students aren't current in their payments on student loans. So you've got 33% of students who aren't current, 21% who are in default. I'd use the whole 50% as an indicator in making that school more accountable for.
So that's a tougher measure.
Well, I think it's a more accurate measure, and I would apply, and you could apply it to all schools, public, private, nonprofit, whatever, and all programs, because lots of times it's this program or that program. I mean, my daughter is an actor in New York. You wouldn't really expect an actor in New York or a songwriter in Nashville to have a big income in their third or fourth year. They might be Dolly Parton, or they might, they might, but probably they won't. So you don't need a big clumsy tool for all programs.
And so you've also talked about measuring the value of a degree. So as part of our accountability, how do you do that? What are your metrics for that?
That's hard to do. I mean, I really, our founders weren't measured by their ability to, they were all liberal arts majors.
Right.
And I don't really think the purpose of college is to get a job. I think the purpose, but I do think that. Are
you alone in that view, do you think, among your Republican colleagues? Do you think there's a push for sort of quality, and not quality?
No, and I've done it myself. I mean, when I was governor, I had to sell the higher standards and more taxes to pay for paying teachers more for teaching well. I said better schools mean better jobs, and they do mean that. But I think particularly in today's world, a broader education to deal with all this stuff that we deal with, the morning tweets and all that is important.
Right. So you brought up the morning tweets. I'm going to bring up some politics. Sorry.
Oh, can't imagine.
It won't involve the president. But let's talk about the Secretary of Education, who has been polarizing, certainly, since she came before your committee for her approval. It does look like, in the absence of the Higher Education Act being reauthorized this year, the Department of Education is moving to do many things through regulation rather than through legislation. Are you happy to let that happen? I mean,
well, in some cases, yes. I mean, regulation has the force of law. Let's take Title IX, which is the obvious place a question like that goes, in which many of the presidents, I'm sure. I mean, Title IX affects more than 6,000 campuses, 50,000 high schools. There's a lot of uncertainty out there about what sexual harassment, for example, means. Since 1999, when the Supreme Court said sex means sexual harassment, nobody's defined what that means. So you're a president of the University of Tennessee, you're not sure what your responsibilities are. All that's been done in the intervening years are all these letters and guidances that have turned out having the force of law. So a regulation, which Secretary DeVos is going to do in the Title IX area, will at least go through the public comment period, be done in an orderly way, be subjected to review by everybody, and then it has the force of law unless Congress overturn it. So I think she deserves credit for regulating in an area that since 1999, no other, the Congress or the department have not made a regulation in.
I think the fear is that she's going to pull back the regulations so much that they're essentially toothless, not just on Title IX, but on online education in terms of sort of meaningful engagement with the instructor.
Well, that kind of depends on your view of how much meddling you want Washington to do in your life. I mean, I asked a group of college presidents, Zepos at Vanderbilt, and the president at that time of the University of Maryland, to come up with a group of recommendations about, what could we do to simplify the jungle of red tape, as they called it, that surrounds administrators of our 6,000 campuses. They came up with a lot of things. Take online, for example. If you're at the University of Maryland and you want to operate in every state, you've got to get permission from every state. They recommended we change that. They recommended we take that FAFSA, which 20 million families fill out every year, and simplify
the financial aid form,
which we could easily do.
Right.
So generally speaking, I like autonomy for campuses, and I resist more federal regulation of campuses. You've already got deans, presidents, boards of trustee, legislators, and governors in the case of public institutions, which is where 80% of students go. I don't think you need a lot of meddlers from Washington added to that.
With so much focus on online education, though, don't you need some kind of quality metric there and someone saying that these students are actually getting some value? We've seen the downside of that when there's a proliferation of these operators and not much quality.
Well, if you're the University of Maryland, you've got the chancellor, the president, the board of trustees, the legislature, and the governor already. A state could say University of Maryland's a fraud. They can't operate in our state. Could do that.
Right. And then on the question of the FAFSA, the financial aid forms, what is it? It's 108 questions now?
There are 108 now. You fill it online, but it's very intimidating. And for example, in Tennessee, a higher percentage of people fill it out because you have to fill it out to get the Pell Grant, to get the free tuition. The state fills in the last dollar. It intimidates the families and the kids and the adults who are the very ones you would hope might go to the community college. The president of the Southwest Community College in Memphis told me he thinks he loses 1,500 students a year just because of the complexity of it. Senator Bennett of Colorado and I have a way to reduce it to 15 questions.
Well, I've seen that. So what's the opposition to reducing
Well, the
it to
Democrats
15
say,
questions?
we don't want you to do that unless you do a whole bunch of things to pay for free college tuition, and so we have to deal with that issue.
Right. So get at that. You've obviously seen the experience of Tennessee with the free community college for 2 years. Is there some middle ground there in terms of more
Well, there
universal
shouldn't be any
access?
middle ground. I mean, we should just do it. I mean, we need to, everybody agrees that we ought to simplify the FAFSA. The question is whether Democrats will allow us to do it without demanding a lot of things Republicans won't
I
vote
meant on the
for.
question of free college tuition. Is there any way, can Republicans move at all toward that?
Well, the question is, do you want to take the available federal dollars and make the Pell Grant stronger, which I would do, increase it, make it more available to people. We are through the year-round Pell Grant that we've approved. If we make it simpler to apply for it, there'll be more students who take advantage of it. Or should we add it to what we contribute to states to help pay for higher education? I think states should do more. Right now, the average tuition for community college in the country is $3,600. The average Pell Grant is $3,600. So if you're lower income, if you're in that 40% group, your tuition is already free on average. Now, Tennessee's gone ahead and say, we'll make it free for everybody. It costs them $1,600 a year. States can afford to do that.
Right.
They've been dropping their support over the years. They should do that and let us continue with the loans, the federal research, and making the Pell Grant available to as many people as we can in an amount that helps pay for college.
Do you feel that there's too much emphasis on four-year colleges? And
Well, not to, no, I don't think that. I do think there can be more emphasis on avenues for high school students to learn technical skills. We need those, and they may be better attuned to those. I do think that there can be more focus on 2 years of post-secondary education because that fits a lot of needs and is a good stepping stone to a four-year college.
that would be the community college level.
Community college level and the technical institutes. They may be the best bang for the buck in the country right now. They're the 14-month programs where you learn to be a welder and you can often proceed at your own pace. If you half know welding when you go in, all you got to do is learn the other half. You get your certificate, you get a job making $70,000.
Right. You've also talked for several years now about three-year colleges, but that model has never caught on. What do you think's happening
Never
there?
did. It's surprising to me. You know, the Republicans, think marketplaces are great. And so you would think that higher education would be one of the most competitive, rapidly changing institutions we have in America because it's such a marketplace. You
Right.
have all this money following students to 6,000 institutions and all this autonomy. But it's hard to change. And I know the president of George Washington pointed out that based on his study, you could operate 2 colleges on one campus with the same amount of time and effort because of the amount of time colleges waste with long breaks in the summer, et cetera. But colleges don't change easily and student habits don't change easily. I think the closest thing we're going to get, the most rapid advance we get to a shorter degree is the year-round Pell Grant. I think
Right.
that will help.
Right. What else can as you look at the Higher Education Act reauthorization, what else do you think the federal government can do or should be doing?
Simplify the student aid application.
Right.
Simplify the student repayment. There are a whole bunch of ways to do that. It's incomprehensibly difficult to do, ridiculously so.
The ability of students to repay.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are 9 different ways to repay.
Right.
There ought to be 2.
Right.
Ought to be simple. Second, more accountability for the taxpayer for all that money. And as we've just discussed, I think using the student repayment metric rather than the cohort default rate.
Right.
Now, this all sounds everybody here
knows
what that is. And then 3, innovation. We need to find ways to infuse into our institutions an ability to keep up with this internet world that we're in. University of New Hampshire, other places, South New Hampshire, other places are doing a good job with competency-based education.
Right.
You don't get, but that requires adjusting all the federal aid so you don't just get paid for whether your butt's in a seat or not. You get paid if you're learning. So innovation would be the third area. And then while I don't think we should do it from Washington. I think the big area is to have a national discussion about, come on, deal with the underrepresented voices concern in this country. You did it for underrepresented students. Do it for underrepresented points of view. I mean, it's absurd that a scholar like Charles Murray would have trouble making a speech anywhere.
Right.
I mean, you may hate his views, but so what? I mean, that's what, we don't want a whole generation of students who have to go to a safe room when they read an offensive tweet. Right. They need to learn how to deal with that in our society.
I think the trouble is our national conversations these days tend to be so polarized to begin with.
Well, they are, but what's college for? Is to help you, is to give you a generally safe place. I mean, you're supposed to do some ridiculous things in college that don't have the same consequences as later, which is why I've never, in confirmations, for example, thought it was right to say that somebody wrote an article in college and therefore they can't be a judge.
Right.
I don't think that's right. But colleges are supposed to be places where you learn how to deal with the world you're about to be in, and the world we're about to be in is, is this thing.
Yeah.
And if you're in a funk by 10 a.m. because somebody wrote an offensive tweet, you're going to be in a safe house for the rest of your life.
Or a padded room.
A padded room, yeah. You need to deal with it. You need to learn how to counter it and offend it or ignore it or whatever needs to be done. That's what a good academic experience should be. When I was very fortunate to be invited to be on the faculty of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, not just over here, but to go to the faculty meetings and stuff. And for 2 years, and I told the students, I said, the ones getting the best education here are the conservative students, because their views are challenged every day.
Right.
Because the faculty, 3.7% of the registered voters in Cambridge are Republicans. That's a fact. So the dominant view.
They call it the People's Republic of Cambridge.
Well, the dominant view is a little different. Well,
Right.
that's fine. That's fine. But you need to have different ways to have your views challenged.
Right, right. Okay, we have a few minutes for audience questions. I think we're going to bring up the lights so I can actually see if there are any hands raised. Don't be shy. We want to hear from you. I'm not sure I see any hands, so I'm going to go to this one. This is from Anonymous. What do you think about the Secretary's proposal to relax some of the regulations that are imposed on for-profit colleges?
Now, why would that be anonymous? Are you afraid of the question? I mean, who asked that? See, there we are. Now, that in an academic setting, you ought to be willing to stand up and say, I'm so-and-so, I'm from here. This is my point of view. What's your point of view? That's what I would say if we were on my campus, but I'll answer your question. I think the same rules ought to be applied to all institutions. So if we're going to judge default rates by payments instead of defaults, that ought to apply to public, private, nonprofit institutions, including for-profits. The way for-profits are today, it'd probably get a bunch of for-profit colleges in trouble, but it also gets some nonprofit colleges in trouble.
Right. This is an interesting one, and I think this goes to what our last part of our conversation. Senator Alexander's comments suggest that political opinions are a fixed characteristic like racial or ethnic diversity or being a first-generation student. Otherwise, it would not be possible to recruit students based on that kind of diversity. Does he really believe that it would be possible to identify and select 17-year-old college applications based on their political ideologies?
No, I wouldn't. That's not what I mean.
It's more challenging.
I'm just saying that, look, we celebrate diversity, right? Diversity has many aspects. One aspect is, when I went to NYU Law School, they asked me, who did I want my roommate to be? And I wrote back, someone from a background as different as mine as possible. Well, as far as they could get was a Jewish kid from Long Island. That was who's Ed Lampert, who lives here, is a great friend. But so all I'm saying is campuses are supposed to give students the privilege of being exposed to many things they might not have grown up with. I wouldn't have grown up with an environment like Greenwich Village growing up in East Tennessee. So I was exposed to that. And I would think that campuses should welcome that opportunity. And yeah, that's a point. That some things are fixed, some things aren't. But it's still a matter of giving people a chance to be exposed and learn to deal with various points of view. Senator Howard Baker used to say he tried to be an eloquent listener because the other fellow might be right. And that's a part of what you need to learn.
All right, I want to do one quick question because she actually has a name. From Barbara Gelman Danley. Congratulations on not being anonymous. President of the Higher Learning Commission. You have backed the idea of allowing accreditors more flexibility to approve innovative pilot programs, as has Senator Burr. What might go in the HEA reauthorization to support that? Thank you for appreciating the need to loosen strangulating federal rules.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a little time. Thank you for the question. It's a great, and you can help me with that by suggesting to me pilot programs that you think accreditors could use to allow innovation. I think that's probably the best way to introduce more innovation. You mentioned online. There has to be some regulation. Well, Georgia Tech, other universities have done a pretty good job of dealing with online education. So if we allow accreditors, or even encourage accreditors, to create new avenues for innovation through the accreditation process, since accreditation is governed really by the colleges and universities themselves, that's probably the best way to encourage innovation. And I would welcome any specific suggestions about how to do that.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Kate.